Me and brother our day, we've been working hard at this to try to set up a kind of gathering where we can go deeper into the aspects of addiction and spirituality. And for that, I asked Bob to come out and speak on that. And the topic for today is going to be the conquest of addiction and spirituality.
Interesting. Good. Well, certainly, it's always a happy occasion for me to be back at home because we grew up. This is my hood. This is my street, and of course, I'm at home and want you to be at home as well. And it is always even better when we gather with such a positive motive, a positive purpose. How many of you are clinicians or work with the? And how many are first-hand experiencer of the addictions? Good, good. And this is really important because I don't have to tell you that probably one of the most devastating phenomena that is undergoing in our community is this addiction. It is devastating us. It has actually shut down the mothering principle in many of our women. This is a very new level of addiction as we are witnessing in our community. Historically, it has almost always been men who have been most dysfunctional. Right? But here we have a new era of addiction that has shut down the mothering principle. And when that happens, beloved, we're out of here. And so anything and everything that we can do to help reverse that trend, that direction, will be in our own interest as well, won't it? Because we're black folks too. And these are our brothers, our sisters, right, who have been literally devoured by this addiction. And there are so many different theories about addiction. There's the disease model, which is the most popular model. Some things you have to understand about the disease model of addiction. Primarily, it is promoted principally by white people. And it's being promoted because if you can make it a disease, you can get that funding. Are you following me? The National Institute of Mental Health now is willing to give you dollars to run your programs and so forth and so on. And that means income. That means livelihood. If it was not a disease, insurance would not pick it up and so forth and so on. So there's an economic motive, even in the way we define addiction and the approach toward helping those recover from it. But when you look at it very medically now, you see, addiction does not really fit the medical model. There is no virus that invades the system, is it? Then what is the underlying mechanism that drives addiction, if in fact it is not medical, in the very narrow sense of the word medical, something arising and originating at the level of physiology? Well, one of the models of addiction that is not so popular in the West is the model that addiction is fundamentally a transphysical phenomenon. By transphysical, I simply mean it has its origin at a transphysical level. It is certainly manifested at the physical level, but it does not originate there. That addiction is somehow related to a kind of moral deficit disorder. Please make a note. Kind of moral deficit disorder, a kind of inability to behave rightly toward oneself and one's own best interest and one's own well-being. There is something not functioning in an individual that permits them to do, say, behave in ways that is clearly self-destructive, isn't it? Absolutely. Right? Because addiction fundamentally is self-destructive. But it's interesting. For the addict perspective, it is not self-destructive. From the addict's perspective, it is somehow putting them in some kind of better condition So how do we account for this contradiction? We will begin to explore that. I simply want to preface our discussion with locating addiction at different levels in the spectrum of our being. Right? You already are familiar with addiction in its relationship to your body and the bodily function. Genes and predisposition and diet and so forth and so on. You even are familiar with the social factors that allegedly contributes to addiction. Poverty, etc., etc., etc. But very often we do not look at the other spectrum, because are we not more than our bodies in our society? Certainly we are. And so by looking at the moral deficits that predisposes a certain person to be self-destructive, we're beginning to get some insight now into the true origin and the foundation of addiction. And I am saying that all addiction is motive and purpose toward making oneself feel better. Please make a note of that. Without exception, and in every form that it may take. And remember, there are many forms of addiction. It's not just simply and merely substance abuse. It is people abuse, situational abuse. You see? Addiction is any kind of pathological drive in the effort to make oneself feel better that in fact is counterproductive. It actually destroys one's state of being. Are you following me so far? Okay. Since the purpose then of addictive behavior is to make oneself feel better, we have to now begin to explore the very context out of which this drive arises. Let me just, before we plunge to that level, say a few more things about moral deficit disorder. Moral deficit disorder occurs in individuals who simply do not have or refuse to surrender and subject themselves to their own conscience. It's really interesting. It is a kind of subjective form of authority disorder. Are you with me? You must have worked with children. Anybody work with children toward school? Then you know there's some children that are just defiant. They're not going to cooperate at all. You see, they have problems with authority, don't they? And anytime they encounter authority, their response is either childish or adolescent. The addict tends to be adolescent, because the adolescent response to authority is what? To challenge, to buck the system, and so forth and so on. Well, guess what? We all have internalized an authority in the sense of our own conscience. Your conscience is a kind of inner authority, isn't it? That tells you, don't do this. You know what I mean? Don't do that. Right? Well, the addict is simply a person that is in conflict and rebellion against their own conscience. You follow me? Because your conscience says what? Don't shoot that shit. Right? Don't do that. Don't steal that money. Put your mama money back in her purse. That ain't right. Don't spend that money for the children food on a bag. That's what your conscience did. And you rebel against your conscience. You defy it. So it's a kind of moral deficit disorder, manifesting the inability to follow your own inner authority. And what we oftentimes do is we use the addiction and all of the negative behavior with it to justify it. Right? I was drunk. That's why I beat you to death. It ain't my fault. You know. We use the habit itself to justify the rebellion, don't we? I'm an addict. You know, y'all have to forgive me for stealing y'all money and lying to you. You see my so forth and so on. Right? All of that is very adolescent. All that is a part of what I call the ego racket. It's a racket. It is simply a strategy that we devise in order to gratify ourselves outside of the limitations and the guidance of our own conscience. All right? Are you with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little different approach that we're going to be taking here today. Ego is fundamentally the drive towards self-gratification. And I mean that in the widest sense of the word. It's at the level of the physical, isn't it? The emotional, the mental, and you will find even the spiritual. But that's a kind of a misnomer. But I simply want to suggest to you that there is simply no spectrum of your being that is not governed by the ego impulse. So this egoic impulse then, this purpose, the aim toward self-gratification. And by self-gratification, I mean very clearly the maintenance of a state of comfort. All of us, without exception, are at all times, principally, involved in the activity of maintaining consolation and comfort. The ego impulse is purpose toward self-consolation, constantly trying to make yourself feel better, or at least not worse, to maintain a functional level of comfort. And insofar as that goes, there's no crime. There's nothing to condemn about that. But we must understand what happens when this egoic impulse turns pathological. Right? When this egoic impulse falls outside the domain of common sense, intelligence, so forth and so on. And that's one of the things that characterizes addiction. It is not intelligent behavior at all. And that comes as a shock to a lot of users because they've been thinking they're intelligent. Your addiction is a clear sign of your lack of intelligence. It is self-evident that you're not very intelligent, by definition. By definition. Therefore, ultimately, we will have to include an additional component in recovery, which is the restoration of intelligence. No fooling, no kidding, the real deal. Right? Now, I make a very vast distinction between intelligence and intellectualism. You know, the mere ability to remember facts and data and then spurt it back. That a monkey can do that. You see, that is not a sign of any kind of intelligence at all. Let's start unpacking this concept. And remember, on just this single occasion, we're not going to exhaust this. You know, this is a very profound kind of understanding that you must have. But certainly I am intending to give you something to consider, to simply think about. This egoic impulse, this impulse toward making ourselves feel better, even when that process involves contradicting our own conscience, our own common sense. It's something that we must really examine very, very closely. So you have to understand a little bit more about ego. Ego can also be understood as being the false sense of self. A false sense of self. Egotism is acting on that false sense of self, isn't we'll be talking about ego mythology. A kind of myth that we have made up about ourselves that is not rooted in any reality at all. And how that predisposes us to do, say, and be ways that is ultimately self-destructive, self-defeating, and counterproductive every single time. But these are still the kind of psychological definitions of ego, right? But there is a kind of ego that is trans-psychological, that cannot be accounted for merely in psychological terminology. The spiritual basis of ego. Long before ego filters down to the level of your psychology and mind, it gets reflected there. In much the same way as the sun is reflected in a pool of water, one mustn't confuse the image in the point of water with the real thing. It's a reflection. Ego and all of the horrors associated with it at the level of psychology is a reflection of a condition that is prior to and transcendent to what is going on at the level of your psychology. And remember, what goes on at the level of your psychology ultimately will go on at the level of your body. Is that about right?
Yeah.
And then it would extend from the level of your body into your relationships and the environment. Is that about right?
Yes,
sure. But I want you to see that process, that what I call throughput. At the spiritual level, ego is fundamentally the feeling of being separate from God. And this feeling of being separate from God, there's a whole condition that we begin to experience. And I want to now borrow from your own life, your own experience, and your own intelligence, because whenever we gather, as I did know, this is never no one-way street. I intend to learn something from you. I don't charge money, but you must pay me with some of your knowledge, you see. So, I want to extract from you your own considerations for a description of what this feeling condition must be like whenever we are under the presumption that we're separate from God. Being separate from God means, of course, that you're disconnected, right? You're unrelated, right? You're on your own, right? What does that feel like, being situated in the appalling immensity of this world on your own? Does it feel good?
No.
So we know that we're going to have one of the things that characterizes the egoic condition is fear. Is that about right?
Yeah.
So you know fear somewhere is playing a role in a person's addiction.
That's right.
If they use it, that person is terrified. Terrified at a very deep level. And as a clinician or therapist or counselor, you must simply give that person relief from their fear. You must go into that fear underlying addiction. Is that about right? Simply, give them some methadone or, some medication to give them relief from the physical symptoms of their dilemma. That's not counseling nobody. You see? That's called patchwork. That's using bubblegum and string. You understand? It don't hold nobody. So we know that this very situation, this very condition, the egoic condition that results based on our presumption of being separate from God, generates fear. Right? And we can almost start unpacking this fear camp. to begin to get a profile and a view of the egoic condition, what's actually is being experienced by this individual. Where there's fear, there's what else? Like where there's smoke, you know there's fire. Where there's fear, what else is it? Oh, now this black folk, this is what I like. Right. Anger, doubt. Got some anger, got some doubt.
Shame and guilt.
Shame, that's right. Guilt.
Loneliness.
Oh, who said that? That hitting it right on the money. Loneliness. I mean, and we won't exhaust it, but I want you to exhaust it. You know what I mean? Look into that. Find that out. You know, make your observation as detailed and as exhausted as possible. You want to know all of the symptoms, right? The spiritual symptoms that predisposes an individual to become vulnerable to addiction in any of its forms. Isn't that what a good doctor do? Right? You got to know the patient's sick. Right? You don't go to anything else. All you're doing, you're listening to symptoms. Where it hurt. Hurt here. You got to know that. So we know there's anger. You see, when you're in a state of fear, because you are all by yourself. Ain't nobody got your back. God done forgot all about you. You see, God is not a real conscious force in your life. God is a philosophy. It is a belief system. But it does not function in your life. You're not governed by it. Are you following me? If I am connected with God in a functional way, right? Then I'm able to reflect that in my life and living. That's right. Is that about right? Yeah. If God is taking good care of me, then aren't you going to see me kick back? Am I going to be worried about anything? No. Out of this doubt, there's a lot of worrying associated with it, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. Definitely.
It comes with the egoic condition.
Right. Like you say, the worry brings about the stress.
Yes. Oh, we didn't put that. Let's put that stress in there, brother. That's right.
And depression.
Oh, gotta put depression in there.
Exactly.
Can't have no addiction without depression. Addiction to that. You gotta have some depression. You know that. You gotta have some depression. Gotta have some stress.
Right.
Anxiety.
Oh, because that's the most ultimate form of a fear, isn't it? Anxiety. You're not only afraid of what's going on right now, you're afraid of what might happen.
Right.
You already high, but you worried about, damn, tomorrow coming. I'm get that. That's right. I got to worry about getting high tomorrow. That's anxiety, isn't it? You see, you high right now. You got enough stuff to make it to midnight, but that you cannot derive any contentment from that. Because anxiety won't let you. Because you worry, damn, I'm going to have enough dope for tomorrow. It's amazing. So let's put that up there. Anxiety. You see? And we probably, as we go along, we probably can really tease out at least about 34 of these, about 34 of these feeling conditions that are associated with being in a state of ego. Right? But I mean, the part of the benefit is in you doing the work. Find that out.
I think the important one for me is helpless and hopeless.
Yes. And that's a special breed of depression, isn't it? A feeling of hopelessness. And hopelessness is predicated on a feeling of powerlessness.
Yes, right.
Right? Powerlessness. You also know that there's not a strong sense of who you are.
No,
is that right, brother?
That's right.
That's right?
That's right.
There's a weak sense of identity, isn't there?
Yes.
You don't know who you are. Right? Yes, sir, Philip.
The Bhagwan, let me apologize for my guests who have arrived just a little late.
No,
and I would ask that you humbly submit to a summary you know, like of the position that you previously stated. I'm sure my friends and colleagues would not mind the repeat of that most critical, important information that you shared prior to their
We'll try
arrival.
to do it. Of course, we won't do justice. That's part of the consequences of being late. But since you all are already here, it may be better just share that piece with them.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because if I summarize it, I might miss something.
Okay.
And I don't want to cheat them. You know what I mean?
They get the tape.
They can get the tape. That's what we're making
right.
the tape.
That's right.
All right.
We won't get a gift.
But to just bring you up, what we were looking at fundamentally is the kind of psycho-spiritual condition that predisposes individuals toward addiction. And what we were seeing is that this psycho-spiritual condition is fundamentally what we call the egoic state, a state of being that is predicated on being separate from God or the Creator or that which has brought you into being. Feeling separate, you now begin to experience fear. You start feeling very limited, on my own, abandoned, if you will, right? And out of this fear now, it generates a whole set of subsidiary emotions. And all of these emotions now cruising in your system is what begins to set you up. Because one of the things we notice is that none of this stuff feels good, does it?
No.
Anger and being in a state of rage, that don't feel good. And there's much to say about anger. In fact, I invite some of you to our personal transformation groups. We call them PTGs. So Darji can keep you posted on them. They're held on Saturdays and other days of the week. We're specifically focused in on anger, because that's a critical one. You know what I mean? When you're working with people who are addicted, that's the first order of business, right? Because so much of the rest of this stuff is linked into that. We mentioned depression. Depression is a form of mismanaged anger that one has in oneself. Guilt is a form of anger in oneself. Shame is a form of anger in oneself, and so forth. So anger contains a lot of this stuff. Anger itself is a part of a constellation, really, of negative conditions that are bound to arise whenever we fall into the egoic state. And that will be, in addition to anger, feelings of lust, greed, attachment, and vanity. These five will generate all the rest. We'll talk about that a little later. I don't want to dump too much theory yet, because I want this to naturally unfold out of our own intelligence and out of our own reflection. So we're beginning to see that in this condition of fear, that there's a lot of other phenomena, sub-phenomena that arise, that really now creates a state of agony. You didn't mention pain. I don't know how y'all missed that. What kind of addict y'all been? Y'all had to do this. Y'all had to do this all over again. You understand? No, man, come on. You missed the most important part. Pain.
Too painful to
Pain. All of that stuff equals psychic pain.
Yes.
In Buddhism, they have a term for it. They call it dukkha. Now you begin to see that addiction is fundamentally a strategy that people resort to give themselves relief from their dukkha, their psychic suffering, which itself arises out of the ego condition and the presumption of being separate and disconnected from that force which sustains you. And African psychology, spirituality, tradition, it has always been understood that that creative force takes care of you. Right? Takes care of you. Right? It's much like this job, right? Which if you leave, this child is not going to be sitting there nice and comfortable and secure. Because what? Mama ain't automatically she would go into a state of fear, insecurity. You see? Because nothing is taken care of. Right? When you make the presumption that you're separate from God, the feeling is that nothing is taking care of me and I must take care of myself. Right? And then when you look at yourself, you see how limited you are. Damn, how am I do that? You know what I mean? I don't have enough power to manipulate the people, the circumstances, the situation. I can't control the world. You understand? Now I'm generating more and more fear because if I can't do that, if I don't have enough power to control all of the threats to my well-being, then you can see how that's going to just escalate my fear, right?
Right.
And my discomfort,
Right.
right?
I feel vulnerable.
That's right. I feel very vulnerable. That's right. And that feeling of being vulnerable doesn't feel good. It's a kind of psychic pain. And therefore, I got to give myself some relief from that. Is that about right? And the abuse of drugs, the abuse of food, the abuse of sex, the abuse of money, right? And all the other variety of forms that addiction takes simply becomes a strategy to relieve ourselves. I call them egoic strategies. Are you with me?
And do they all run on a compulsive and obsessive roller coaster?
That's right. They are all compulsive and obsessive. That's what makes them pathological.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Right? And you can really see that, especially when you measure the intensity of the psychic pain. Right? That drives that person. It drives the person constantly. So addiction is simply a part of our ego strategies. Isn't that interesting? But it's not the only strategy that the addict used to give themselves relief from their state of degradation. It's interesting. Because you still will get involved in people, right? If for no other reason than to have them available to exploit financially in order to feed your addict.
Okay.
Right? So you're still interested in relationships. Right? You are. Right? So that becomes a part of your strategy. You got to find your clique. You understand? You got to find your circle. You know, you got to find those people so just in case you ain't got a hit covered, you can go somewhere and get a hit, borrow a hit. You understand? Relationship. So that maintaining relationship with that individual becomes just more of your own ego strategy. Ultimately, it's all about being relieved from this pain, right? Now, what I'm saying, beloveds, is something very simple, that all of these ego strategies fail. They will always be self-destructive, self-defeating, and counterproductive. You will get the absolute opposite outcome over time. And this is right. Even for individuals. Now, do you think addicts are the only ones that suffer from ego? No. Oh, hell no. Everybody does. That's the key. Because otherwise you're going to start thinking you some kind of freak or some kind of aberration, right? Or you fell out from a different planet somewhere. No. The egoic condition is a part of the human condition. It characterizes the human condition. Everybody is suffering from it. It is innate. And then one of the tasks in life becomes how to transcend this condition. How to transcend it. That becomes one of the tasks of life that we all have. Traditionally, spiritual development has been the most effective means by which to transcend the pain, right? But spiritual development obviously is not a route that everybody takes. It depends on so many factors, on how you were parented, your culture, and so forth and so on. What's available to work with in your immediate environment, and so forth and so on. So everybody, although they have the capacity, simply did not make that selection and adopt some other means. Some people are trying to make enough money because the presumption if I can make a lot of money, I'll be able to be happy. Right? So fundamentally then, whenever we make the presumption of being disconnected from God and fall into this state of ego, in addition to pain and all of the things that we have talked about thus far, the most summary description of our condition is one of simply being unhappy. Profound unhappiness. So in some kind of strange way, drugging becomes a means to make oneself happy. The addict is just trying to be happy. Are they to be condemned for that? Did that make them a rotten, no good human being because they're trying to be happy, folks? No, of course not. They're trying to be happy. They just don't know how to go about it. That's all.
Don't have the questions to get the answer.
Right. Don't have the question to get the answer.
Excuse me.
Yes, but
Under your self-destructive, self-defined, and counterproductive, seem like it should be maybe a component like self-indulgent.
Oh yes, of course.
That's what it's all about.
Sure, it is always.
All right.
Let's clarify that just so that everybody's on the same page. When I say that originally that the egoic impulse is always aimed toward self-gratification. That means that it is always self-indulgent.
Okay.
Right? Always. Without an exception. Because the whole ambition is to console yourself. To make yourself feel somehow better. To give yourself some relief, if you will, from the dukkha. Right? That's what you're trying to do by using it. You're trying to get relief from this stuff. Right? And it is always self-indulgent. Without a question. Which brings us to a thing to really take a real close look at. What I'm suggesting is something very radical. I am saying that human beings are innately positioned such that they are innately self-indulgent, preoccupied with self-gratification. And human growth is about growing beyond that. Remember, we are called human being. Being is a verb, isn't it? It's a process, isn't it? Right? That begins rooted at the level of the primal and primitive. To be self-indulgent, obsessively self-gratifying, is to still be primitive in terms of your humanity, isn't it? Right? Human existence is about rising out of that, isn't it? Right? But you're absolutely right. It is self-indulgent. Always. With no exception. And again, the ideal is to make yourself somehow feel better. So it seems to me then that since all of that stuff we've been talking about, depression, anger, doubt, fear, unhappiness, dukkha, blah, 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 seems to me that all of that comes into being after the egoic condition. So it seems to me that our task is simply how to transcend the ego. Is that about right? If one is able to transcend one ego, then you solved all of this, haven't you? Right? Because all of these other phenomena are phenomena that are derivative of the egoic condition, isn't it? Right? And in fact, if I don't transcend the egoic condition, and I give them some Prozac to deal with the depression, have they gone anywhere?
No.
Oh, hell no, they're not going anywhere. Right? They're still in the egoic condition, aren't they? Right? And that Prozac will wear off, right?
That's right.
So now they're going to become what? Addicted to Prozac.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Right. Because without it, again, they're back in their dukkha. What if I give them a job? So build their self-esteem. Are they out of here?
No.
Oh, hell no. Because eventually, if they lose the job, what happens?
That's right.
And is the job going to last forever?
No.
No. One of the things that characterizes the nature of human experience is that everything is impermanent. Nothing is permanent. That's part of the fear. Isn't it? Nothing stays the same. Cannot stay the same. So that too will change. What about if I get married, get a wife, or get a husband? Huh? Hell, that might aggravate, that might escalate. Because now they gonna lay that dukkha on you, right? Now you got two sets of dukkha to deal with, right? So, I mean, really, there doesn't seem to be any solution to suffering within the egoic context. It seems that the only way to deal with the very foundation of our addictions, in whatever form they take, is to somehow transcend the ego. Yes, beloved.
So, to be in the ego state, does it always mean that you're separate from God?
Yes, that is the presumption. Although, and I like now just how you black folks are beginning to kick into your inherent spiritual precociousness, because you was asking another level of question. The one thing about it, the egoic condition, which is based on the presumption of separation from God, is that it's not true. Because in reality, can there be any separation from God? No. Ego is what we call an illusion.
So it's subjective, huh?
Maya. Yes, Maya. Maya. It is a conclusion that you have came to about reality, God, and your relationship with it, that is simply not true. By definition, you cannot be separate from reality. How can you be separate from reality? Think about that. I mean, that's deep, isn't it? Is that possible?
No.
Is it ever possible? Now, don't patronize me. Don't flatter me.
No.
Is that ever possible for you to exist and somehow not be a part of reality? No.
One way or the other.
If you were not a part of reality, you simply would not exist. Is it about right? So by definition and automatically you are part of God in reality. By definition. You are already being taken care of by God. Always and already. Your well-being is the case. Now this is the philosophical part you must do. Because this is the part you must become convicted about. You must see this. Ego is the result of the failure or the inability to see this reality, right? Therefore, it has been called ajana. Ajana means ignorance. Ego, fundamentally, is rooted in ignorance. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? And it's a kind of supreme ignorance. It's an ignorance of the reality of your relationship with God and your oneness with God and the inability to be separate from it. Therefore, the inability to be alone, struggling. Is that about right?
Yes, that's right.
That's about right.
That's exactly right.
Exactly right. And so, at some level then, in order to transcend ego, what we're really talking about is transcending ignorance. But you see how see how we get down to this thing now? Right? It's ignorance, isn't it? Ignorance. And out of this ignorance, the ego presumption is made. And then all of the horror begins from there. Are you with me so far? Yes, beloved.
Your initial paradigm in terms of the ego can be viewed as a reflection of an individual's psychology. I was with you. My experience and what I have learned from the recovering community is that the spiritual nature of our disease is or was our self-centeredness. Again, that's kind of consistent with your paradigm in terms of ego. And in terms of traditional psychology, there is a concept of the egomaniac or having an egomaniacal kind of predisposition, which is all predicated on that obsessive compulsive with self.
Right.
if the goal is in terms of a healthy recovery on a spiritual level, physical, mental, but specifically focusing on the spiritual, if the goal is to transcend the ego, I guess my question becomes, under what conditions and what are the specific activities that one has to engage in? Because in my mind, there has to be a process to get you from here to there.
You're absolutely right.
And that, for me,
Yes.
the solution-based comments is where I would find value in learning more, or at least hearing what you have to say in that regard. Because I understand the paradigm that you've set up, and I don't want you to spin me or lose me, but I'd like you to kind of focus in on that.
I definitely understand, and your question is very insightful. There's a book that I've written called Who Am I? That addresses that whole dynamic. It really looks at the developmental stages and the formation of ego and ultimately in its transcendence, right? Because you're absolutely right. There has to be a kind of pre-existing context for that radical transcendence to take place in the first place. What it presupposes then is that, first of all, you have to have a strong psychology. You got to get psychologically straight to become spiritual. Otherwise, it never will happen.
Don't worry.
The minimum condition is that you must be sane.
Oh, that's the minimum.
Minimum. Now, I mean, think about it. If you're not sane, how would you become enlightened?
Right.
That has never happened. Will never happen. The most fundamental prerequisite for the radical transcendence of ego, which is what I'm calling real spirituality and real religion, as opposed to pseudo-religion and mock spirituality, the most fundamental requirement is that you must be sane. You must get straight at the psychological level. Right? Now, there's a very real process associated with that. Getting straight is never achieved rhetorically. You cannot talk yourself straight. There's a real ordeal involved in this process, right? Now, one of the things that you must do, you must transcend this false sense and image that you have been operating in and from of yourself. Mask, persona. In fact, personality is taken from the Latin persona. Persona means mask, something that masks. Thespians in Greek theater in ancient times used to wear these masks.
Right.
These masks would communicate the character, and you all know all of that. So I won't revisit. That's very well known. Your personality functions like a mask. Your personality is nothing but the combined coalescing of all of the little strategies that you have come up with to make yourself feel better. You constructed a personality. Now, when we talk in the culture of psychiatry, we talk about, some of you must be familiar with DSM-4, and we talk about Axis 1, Axis 2, and so forth and so on. We talk about personality disorders and so forth. And that's where we're coming to here. Many of us just have simply developed personality disorders.
Right.
Now, the personality disorder that you were talking about that comes closest to what I am arguing for the radical transcendence of is the narcissistic one, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you all know about narcissistic personality disorders, right? This is a person who simply don't have the ability to think beyond the limitation of themselves, right? This person is contracted, right? They're withdrawn, they're contracted. Ego is characterized by a kind of contraction, isn't it? In fact, in Sanskrit, the word that we use for it is called sankoka. Sankoka means to be contracted. So ego really is a condition of self-contraction, where the person has really pulled himself back from others. You pull yourself away from others. You presume to be different from others. You presume to be unrelated to others. Hell, you're not related to God. How will you be related to man? Is that going to happen? You see, with the presumption of being separate from God, must necessarily come the presumption of being separated from other men, other women. In fact, a presumption of separation from all of nature. Is that all right? So a kind of self-contraction takes place, doesn't it? And the most pathological form of this self-contraction is the narcissistic personality disorder, right? And this kind of sick possession with yourself. I call it you become self-possessed.
I am all is me.
That's right. Very narcissistic. Very narcissistic. Right? So we have to deal with that. Now, there are many ways to approach that. I mean, this is what accounts for the different schools of psychology. I mean, there's Freudian approaches, there's Adlerian approaches, there's Jungian approaches, there's transpersonal, and all of the other varieties of psychology. What I am suggesting to you is that in the spiritual traditions of the planet, the great spiritual tradition have components built into them that automatically addresses this issue.
Right.
So when you come to a real genuine spiritual path or a genuine spiritual teacher, the first thing they're going to make you do is get straight.
Right.
You must get straight. You must get functional. You must first become a first-class human being, right? You must get all of that work done. Then they will give you what I call, and what has been called traditionally, the Dharma. The teachings, the means, methods, disciplines necessary for the transcendence of ego, right? Dharma. Then you are initiated. Then you are given a yoga. Then you're given practices, not before. To give them to a person who is not sane yet is to waste it, because you're not sane. And addiction is a sign of your insanity.
That's right.
Simple. It is a sign of insanity. And by insanity, I mean, really, you understand this functioning in a way that is not counterproductive and self-destructive. That's sanity, isn't it? All right? And if anytime you're not functioning in a way that is useful and contribute to your own well-being, you're fundamentally insane.
That's right.
Fundamentally. You may know a lot of other stuff, but I don't count that.
Okay.
That don't have any value. It has no currency. It's just rhetoric.
Right.
You're fundamentally insane.
Okay.
And you must get sane. And you must transcend in all of those conditions that are associated with being insane, of which the principal one is narcissistic personality disorder. Now there's borderline too, but borderline is just another special form of the narcissistic. Yes, beloved?
I also find that I also find value in that, just in terms of the mythology behind Narcissus, which, you know, the mythology is that, you know, his fate ended in his death.
Yes.
And the way he died was that he was looking at a reflection of himself in a pond and he drowned.
That's right. That's the symbol.
That's how he died.
Sure.
He drowned looking, he fell over at himself in the reflection of the pond and died. Ooh.
He could not lift his attention away from it. He became inert.
From himself.
That's right. And that is self-possessed. Now, isn't that really what happened with a person that is functioning fundamentally from the egoic condition? You are self-possessed. You are a narcissist.
But on the feeling, I know in my addiction, it was all about my feelings and how I felt. So luckily, I was restored to some degree of sanity.
Yeah.
I was able to sit here and have this discussion today.
Yeah. But I want you to understand that this narcissism characterizes the egoic condition by definition. When you look at it, what is your principal human activity? I want you, as a homework, find that out. I want you to find this out. I want you to appreciate the brilliance of these spiritual teachers. These men and women are brilliant. I mean, it makes Freud and Jung them look like children.
Okay.
I mean, these people are brilliant. They went deeply into this. Now, I want you, as your own personal homework, find out through observing yourself, what is your principal human activity? What is the activity that you are always consciously and even unconsciously engaged in? What are you are always goaling to do? What is your goal? What are you always trying to do? Now, I'm going to give you the answer, but I want you to see it too. Okay? The principal activity that governs human behavior is the search for consolation, to make themselves feel better, to be happy. The search for happiness is based on the presumption of not being happy. Is that about right?
Yeah. Right.
Otherwise, you would not search, would you? Right? Would you?
No.
You can't. All seeking is based on the premise of being separate from that which you seek.
That's right.
Even the search for God is based on the presumption of being separate from God. So the ultimate level, what's that all about? If you really accept the reality of God, how can there even be a search? Search drops out. Search is an ego activity. It's not bad. Don't misunderstand me. In the book, I even argue for the legitimate role that egos play. It does have one. Right? But it must be transcendent at some point. So there is this constant drive, motive to be happy. Narcissists saw an image of himself, fell in love with it, but could not possess it. Ultimately, in his effort, fell over, lost his life. Now, what we have did is the same, except we have created a false image of self. Because the reflection of Narcissus in the pond was not even a real representation of who he was it?
No.
It was a reflection. We have done the same thing. And like Narcissus, we are fascinated to the point of our own destruction. I have called this your ego mythology. Another word, vanity. And that's what Narcissus has always been, an example of vanity and the destructive results of vanity. Now, you remember in that original complex I gave you, that original constellation of anger, lust, greed, attachment, I included what? Vanity. Now, vanity is simply the result of our arrogating to ourselves qualities and virtues that in reality we really do not possess. How did you know that? How did you know that? Is that all right?
Yeah.
It is a part of your mythology.
Yeah.
It is some stuff you have made up about yourself. It's not rooted in any reality at all. And then you become fascinated with that myth about yourself, right? Like Narcissus, right? You become self-possessed with all of that, right? You cling to all of that. You become governed by that. And then you perish as a result. Right? Now, you have arrogated to yourself the virtue of tolerance. Got a lot of tolerance, right? I'm very loving. Right? I have a lot of compassion. Y'all know what y'all say. Don't join right here. Don't do all right.
Yeah.
Right? I'm very honest, right? I like people. Right? This is so forth and so on. Now, out of that arrogated condition, you now move into certain realities that really require disability. Now you get married. And you've been talking all that bullshit about how loving you are. Then you stand into the relationship of marriage and you find you don't have no tolerance. You have no patience and absolutely no ability to get along well with other people. There is no evidence nowhere in your life of possessing such a virtue. You've been out of relationship every 3 months for the last 15 years. Get straight. And that's the thing the guru says. Get straight. Get straight. Grabs Narcissus by his cuff of his neck and pull him up. Saying that is not you. That's not the real self. Lose all sympathy and fascination.
When you
See?
began, you spoke on the reflection in the sun, in the pool,
Yeah.
in the puddle, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that he would mention about
Sure.
narcissism.
Sure.
And it
And-
came out that the reflection is not the real thing.
That's right. You see, those are archetypes. That's built into the whole entire human experience at all times and in every culture and in every place. This has always been understood, right? So we have to deal first with our ego mythology, right, and transcend that. You see, transcend that, right? Because the egoic condition is something even more profound than your ego mythology. You can't transcend just your ego mythology, just your vanity. You don't have a shot at transcending no egoic condition, because ego mythology itself is a subsidiary phenomenon, a phenomenon that is arising out of the egoic condition. You can't handle your vanity. How will you handle real ego? Come on. You can't do that. You can't do that. And that necessarily means that you have to break all of your habits that you have developed on the basis of such a false identity. And stop being so preoccupied with it. You see? Because this is what people don't want to change. They possess, like narcissists, they can't break their constant obsession with this reflection, false reflection of self. Right? And so they say, I can't change. I can't change. I want to, then I won't be me. But look at this me. Look at this me.
Right. Right.
That you're clinging to.
Right.
This not even you,
Exactly.
Narcissus. This is false. This is garbage. This is pseudo. This is ego mythology. This is made out of the same stuff that dreams and fantasies are made out of. It ain't real. Break it. Break that. Get up from that. Rise above your attachment. You see, I included attachment in the original constellation, right? Attachment, right? You're too attached to this false image of yourself. It ain't real no way. You have no patience, no honesty, no capacity to love, no empathy. You have none of those qualities. And that's all right. Realizing that you have none of them, now we can get down to business and really develop it.
Okay.
So if a person is vain,
Is? Yes,
if a person is vain, how then can themselves see that?
They can't by themselves.
That's what
That's why the need for spiritual adepts, teachers, gurus.
Okay.
You just simply can't know it. That's why you're in the condition. You see, we have called that a jhana, right? When you are in a state of ignorance, you can't,
Right.
by definition, transcend. You can't. Grace.
It's scary to.
It's scared to contemplate, but there's a way out of it.
I'm saying wrong.
Yeah.
I didn't say grace. I said it's scary.
It's scary.
No, it's a scary feeling to lose self.
Yeah.
Because if this is all I know of me,
That's
and if
right.
I'm going to let all this go, then what have I become?
Right.
What happens to the me that I know?
Right.
I know this person. I become comfortable with this, and it's hard to let something die.
It's called,
That's the word you put.
it's an ego death.
Yeah, it has to die.
You must die,
It has to die.
while living.
Living.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Heard it?
Right.
Understand it?
Right. You have to die.
Yeah.
The ego has to die.
And that's hard to do. We have to let things go. Even when we don't like people or certain things, it's hard to just let it die. Die and make it, ugh.
That's right.
You know,
It is a real ordeal.
what's going to happen to me now?
That's a real
You know,
ordeal.
and it's very,
Very
difficult.
difficult.
But until that spirit in me died, I was not the person I am today.
You could not be.
I could not be this
You
person.
cannot be. To become a chicken, you must give up being an egg.
Okay.
As damo sanantano. That's how it is. That's how it is. You cannot be your true self as long as you are clinging to being that which is false. It cannot happen. Has not happened. Never will happen. And the grace is a force that intervenes in our life that breaks the pattern. Otherwise, you remain pattern. Something has to actually interrupt your ego pattern. You follow me? And physically talking about Newton's third law, that an object at rest will remain at rest unless acted upon by an outside force, right? That outside force is grace.
Okay.
That too do come from God. And that grace comes in many forms. So it can come in the form of a book, a coincidence, but the most perfect form that grace takes is the form of another human being.
Yes.
And that human being that most fundamentally and radically and profoundly reflect the grace that is God has been called Guru.
That's right.
One who dispels the darkness of your own ignorance, because you can't dispel the darkness of your own ignorance.
So with death, rebirth comes.
Yes.
So with death, rebirth comes.
Sure, with death, rebirth comes. You can't be born again unless you die. Now, there's a second book, and you all see Sadaji, he has all of these books. I didn't know that how far we'll get today. I didn't think to bring them, but it's called Life and Death. Is that the name of it? A Matter of Life and Death. I don't even know the name. A Matter of Life and Death. And what it looks at is the essence of spirituality, right? Because there's a very real component. Now, Ade, you've been to my bigger meetings, right? As some of you know, or don't know, that we have meetings and all over the place. And you notice, one of the first things you notice that I meet in a funeral home.
That's right. That's right.
It's a device. First thing. Because what I'm telling you, you coming to me, you coming to death.
Amen.
My job is to kill you.
All right.
Totally distort this false sense of self. Right? And so just coming through the door, you're already in a different kind of mood. Because it's really about dying this false sense. Really true. So in this book, A Matter of Life and Death, I have gone into those arguments. We have called them the Bado. In Tibetan Buddhism, it is called the Bado. You all must have studied something out of ancient African history and spirituality. A book called the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Persian Heru, as they have called it, coming forth by day. That is also a teaching on how to handle this transaction. But beloved, you're absolutely right. This me has to go.
And it was pain.
Because it's this me that was shooting the dope. It was identification with this me that got you out there shooting dope in the first place. It was this very me that you were trying to console, protect, maintain comfort and well-being for that got you strung out in the first place. The problem was the me. And you were self-possessed. You were clinging to it. You were narcissist. And you almost killed yourself. And a little grace interceded. Right? A little grace interceded. Broke the pattern of narcissism in your life. That's why you sick.
You know it's not.
Had nothing to do with our intelligence. Had nothing to do with your brains. You're not that smart. You know what I mean? This is about grace.
And you know, the steps that we talk about, the most significant, I mean, it was very, not the most significant, but it was very significant to me that once I realized I was insane, it said that the second thing you had to do was come into a God consciousness. You had to believe in a power outside of yourself. And then the third step made a decision to turn yourself over to that power.
To surrender.
And make that connection.
That's right.
With
To
that
surrender.
me that can take care
That's
of you.
right. And do you see that call for surrender characterizes the great tradition? Remember, the 12-step program is simply a kind of makeover or version or interpretation of the great tradition.
Right.
It is in the great traditions that you see this most radical call for surrender. When you enter into the incredible world of Islam, to become Muslim means one who has what? Submit. Bow your ass down. That's what a Muslim does. In the ancient Pharaonic traditions, when you would come into the presence of the Chakam of the pharaohs, because pharaohs were not just tutelage heads of country. This was Osiris in the flesh. This is God, man, sitting on the throne in Egypt, right? And when you were ushered into the presence of that pharaoh, you were made to bow down on your belly. You lay all the way down. Submission. Submission. In Christianity, not my will, but thy will be done. That's submission, right? And so naturally, when you incorporate this wisdom of the role of submission in the transformation of a being into the 12-step process, you're going to get some results. But it's the 13th step that I'm talking about today, right? We're going beyond the 12 steps. Because 12 steps just return you back to being sane. That ain't nothing great for you to be jumping up and bragging about. You should have been sane all the damn time.
nothing for you to be running around on your high horse all up in the air about. You just got back to being sane. There's been people been sane all the time.
Right.
There ain't nothing for you to be bragging about. Bow down.
All right now.
Stay humble.
So if you
Took you 45 years to just become average.
okay,
Right.
That's all you made it at. You just average again.
Right.
There's nothing above average about you
No.
at all. And you got to be clear about that. Now you ready. Now you ready. Now something can be done with you. Now we take you to the 13th stage. Now how to go beyond being just an average human. Are you interested in that?
Very. Yeah. Very.
That's what we
Now that you like being average, you don't feel good? Your sub-average prior condition, don't this feel much better? Now, just as this condition that you're in right now is vastly superior to your prior condition is that. The condition of being above average is superior to where you at now. In fact, it makes where you at now look like being an addict.
That's right.
All right now.
All right.
Watch out. Watch out. You better shoot it away. Watch out now.
So we could go on and on. I just wanted to address beloved question because the question was so profound. But it was not my intention to give you a complete lesson in personality disorders and DSM-4 and all of the difference between the origins of the axis and I mean that stuff you can do on your own somewhere. I want to talk to you a little bit about something that you might not read about in the DSM-4.
All right
that
now.
you may not come across reading Piaget and Freud and Adler and Jung. You see, or Fromm, or reading your big blue books.
It's all right with me.
Beloved, how do we now deal with our real problem? Because there seems to be only one problem, and that is evil. It's the only problem. It is the basis of all our problems. And it seems if we could find, or if something can happen to break our ego pattern, that we really can attain all of our potentials as human beings. So now, rather than go into that, I will leave it next time because that's another long discussion. I will have to talk to you about what we call the upayas. Upayas means the spiritual means of liberation. In Sanskrit, Hinduism, they call it moksha, salvation. What is salvation fundamentally, other than liberation from this? Moksha, salvation, liberation, is simply about the recognition and the rediscovery of one's true self. It is interesting, in ancient Africa, they used to write, the African sages and mystics would write outside of their academies, their ashrams, their schools of wisdom, what really translated into know thyself. They would have out there, worship the gods if you must, but first, know thyself. The ultimate solution then to all our problems is the recovery of true knowledge of self. You must know thyself. And you cannot have that true knowledge of self as long as you're preoccupied with the false self. You have knowledge of the false self. Knowledge of your false self don't mean nothing. That is ignorance, right? Knowledge of your true self, we call that jhana. That's real knowledge. And this knowledge liberates you, sets you free. When you know the truth about who you are, that truth does what?
Set you free.
Set you absolutely free. And I mean free, radically free. I mean free of all of that depression, anger, doubt, anxiety, powerlessness, hopelessness, all of that crap that we're associated with the ego condition. You become free of all of that. And in this place, a mass of bliss come crashing down on you. That is permanent, that does not wax and wane, that is non-conditional, that doesn't go away. You simply rest in it, you abide in it. You are simply always in that condition, whether awake, sleep, you see, doesn't matter anymore. Has nothing to do with your status or lack of it, money or lack of it. It is totally unconditional bliss, what we have called ananda. Absolute, unqualified, unmodified happiness, which is always, already the case. Now, what I want you to understand, beloved, that by virtue of us being connected with God, we participate in all of the benefits thereof.
All right. Now.
One of the principal characteristic of God is that God is full of love and bliss. Touch God, and automatically you become blissed. That's right. There's no other way.
Watch out.
Therefore, if one recovers one true relationship with God, which is one true self, right? Then you may know that you have attained such a recognition in revelation, because this bliss come crashing down in your life. It's not imaginary. You understand? No, hell no, it's not imaginary. It's not walking around saying, oh, I'm blessed, I'm saved. What kind of bullshit is that? That's bullshit. That's rhetorical. You understand? This kind of bliss leaves you speechless.
Yeah, say a word.
You don't have to say, you don't have to tell nobody that you blessed. Because when they feel you coming, they feel that power that you blessed. They used to tell a story, beloveds, about the Buddha. And the Buddha, when he recovered this true condition, it created what they call a Buddha field. The Buddha field was like an energy field. It is said about the Buddha, the Blessed One, when Buddha would move physically in his body, that a kind of energy field will radiate from his body for 24 miles. And says, as the great Buddha moved, and that Buddha field moved with him, as it would come across dead flowers, they will bloom into life. That's being blessed.
All right.
Right? That's being blessed.
Yes.
Because when you bless, you become a blessing. Please make a note of that. You walking around telling people I'm blessed? And you're not a blessing to nobody? What kind of bullshit is that? That's all that is. When you bless, you become a blessing. That's how it goes, folks.
That's right.
Not otherwise.
That's right.
Not otherwise. So, it is this recognition and recovery then of our true self, our true identity, who we truly are. So I will leave you on that note. We will take a few questions. I know you all have other things to do today, and really appreciate you taking a little time out of your day to come and spend with us over here in the ghetto. Right?
Thank you
We're
for
from the
sharing
ghetto,
with us.
And but I do want you to consider the things that I have offered you here today. And then perhaps if those of you who have considered them are interested, you are most welcome to come to our other meetings, or I don't know how frequently I can get over here, because it's really kind of hard to do. So Daji being my brother, you know you have to look out for brothers and family. But ordinarily I do not come out to these kind of venues, you see. But it must have been something special today. All I know is that I was moved to respond to his request. And now that I'm here, I see why. You know, I'm out here today. You all have been certainly worth it. There's something about each of you, no doubt, that is ready. Just simply had enough of being unhappy. Enough of it. Just like at one point in your life you had enough of being an addict.
Right.
You have to get sick of it. You have to hit rock bottom. The same is the case with transcendent unhappiness. You have to hit rock bottom. You got to get sick of it. You're not born to be anything less than blissful.
That's right.
Blissfully existence. So you find out about some of these things. Find out about some of these things. And then come to me on another occasion, and we'll get into it. And I will talk to you about the upayas and the means for the transcendence of ego. Fair enough?
Yes. Thank you.
Then from this point on, I'll just respond to any questions or comments you have. I believe Sadaji have refreshments for you all. want to invite you to have that. So, Dodger, you have refreshments?
Yeah.
All right, so you'll be able to partake in the refreshment, and I'll just informally sit here and we'll chat about it. But you had an immediate comment, beloved?
Yes. One of the things, it's amazing because in my recovery, I have had thoughts and have been searching for other things. It was something that I knew I had to go beyond what I've gotten from NA. NA would always be a part, but I knew it was something else that I needed, and I had been searching for it. And one of the things that I found out, because one of the things I had a problem was when they said I had a disease. My mind kept saying, you catch disease. I mean, it had always been there. I got a disease. Well, you catch a disease, you do something. I went and did this on my own. Self went and did this.
That's right.
So I've always had a problem with that disease.
Yes.
You know? And also, I'm in the teaching profession. And I have, through this process, have seen kids who don't have drugs, but have some addictive behaviors.
That's right.
They ain't never touched the drugs. So my thinking has always been that even with children and adults alike, have all type of addictive behaviors. And kids, we all come self-centered.
That's right. That's how
I mean, a kid wants to do what he wants to do. I want to do what I want to do. What a human being does not.
That's right. That is the human condition.
That's right.
That is what characterizes the human condition.
So,
and we do not condemn it.
Right.
You understand?
That's no self.
That's the primal condition. Don't you expect that?
Right.
Don't you expect things to be primal before they become sophisticated and evolved? Certainly.
So I just want to say that coming here has really set me on that path. It lets me know that my thoughts were always correct in the first place, and to trust in self and to get in with self.
That's right.
And I want to thank you.
That's right. In fact, that becomes one of the upayas, and you're most welcome. When next time we talk about it, there's a kind of means that is intuitive. There's a kind of knowledge that comes intuitively. But for a person who distrusts their intuition, they cannot make use of such intuitive knowledge, can they? And there are those of us who simply are not spiritually mature enough to trust our own inner wisdom. We got to look it up in Britannica, or we got to put it to vote, and then we can act on it. But hasn't there been those moments, beloved, we're driving down the street and some say, don't go down this street, right? But it's no traffic on this street. You know, if I don't go down there, I got to go down this street, the traffic is bumper to bumper, and then you make a kind of rational decision to go down the street that is less traffic because that made rational sense. And you go down there, and in the middle way of the block, you hit something in the street, tears your whole two tires, right? Now you're out of money, inconvenience, etc. Right? So your intuition is the sum total of all that you have learned in every incarnation up to this one. That's powerful. You see, beloved, there is something in you that summarizes your learning experiences from this life. We all have these memories that we carry and so forth and so on. Well, you have lived more than this one life. You have learned much. And everything that you have learned from the very first incarnation, from the very first time of your being, is summarized and contained in your intuition. So when your intuition flashes, it's not just a little knowledge. That's the sum total of all the wisdom you got that you have accumulated in the entirety of your being. And when you understand that, it's easy to relax into. In fact, in Buddhism, we have a saying, learn how to rest in the wisdom of your Rigpa. That's where it's at. And you will notice, beloved, if you really are honest and if you really sit down with it, every time you have moved against your intuition, you have failed. In fact, your addiction itself was a movement against that same intuition.
That's right.
Wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Now that's the truth, isn't it? And that don't make him a bad, rotten human being. It's just the truth. It's the truth about all of us, isn't it? You knew intuitively. You knew intuitively. So now it's just a matter of learning how to live consistent with that intuitive knowledge and wisdom. You see? And that can be done. Beautiful. Somebody had something? Yes, beloved?
Yeah, I would just like to say that it's very ironic that, excuse my tidiness, but,
I have retrieved a lot of information from the point forth that I walked through the door. And what I would like to touch on is you was describing one part of the human self and the disorders that we have about how subjective, how rejective are we to retrieving information and battling with the ego within. And I was finding 1,000,001 things that I said, well, but I have interest in developing on a consistent basis. I have desire. Yeah. And when you was touching in that area there, I'm sitting here like, whoa, and I'm feeling you. And I'm just real glad that I did push through that powerful struggle, that little battle that I was having.
That's right.
Because I received a whole lot. And in my profession, I work in the Department of Corrections. And I'm in constant contact with a bunch of other human beings.
That's right.
And I know making this transition isn't easy. For me, it isn't easy. Right. And you talked about how can we deal with other human beings? We have to first submit. And I often find myself struggling with the submitting process because I'm saying I'm submitting to let this go and here come another one. Right. Right behind it. Yes. And you showed me in various signs how anger detached to various different things. Yes. It derives from.
That's right.
And it's just a lot of
information. It's liberating information.
I would like to follow you with your process.
Well, all of this is by grace of my teaching. So first thing, let me set the record straight. There's nothing brilliant about Bhagwan. I'm you. You understand? I'm from this street.
Right.
I'm born, raised here. I'm from the muck. I'm from the mud. You see? This information that has come to you is by way of my human form of grace that I encountered. You see? That's what that's about. And so I understand exactly what you felt. And hell, I felt the same way. When I came across the Dharma, I knew. I mean, there was no decision. Encountering the Dharma was like a thirsty man finding water in the midst of a desert. And that was 30 years ago. You know what I mean? And beloved, I am still fascinated by it. You see? I am still fascinated by it. It is endless. Wisdom is endless. There is no end. That's the first thing you're going to find out. There's no end, and it's all delight. Just all delight. Do you know, beloved, there's a kind of happiness that is based on knowledge. Have you ever noticed? Think about it. Most of us are pursuing a kind of happiness based on that acquisition of a material. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, in one of the books we have, I call it Infinite Happiness. And in this book on infinite happiness, I talk about all of the developmental stages and strategies for the acquisition of happiness, since that's what we're all about. And there are certain happiness pleasures that you can have, but they don't last. There's a kind of pleasure and happiness that you get just by knowing. It's amazing. And the highest happiness comes from wisdom. Now, this is profound. That's why the wise man, the wise woman is happy. It's not because of what they possess physically. It's the possession of the wisdom that's got them all, high. You see. And in Sufism, that was a whole tradition. Those of you who know something about Sufism or Islam. In Sufism, they used to, in fact, call the places that they gathered wine shop. And they called the coming together, putting our minds together and getting insight, you see, they call that drinking wine. You see. And once you drink the wine, of course you get intoxicated, don't you? And so they used to always tease the newcomer who would come into the wine shop and tell them to be careful, don't drink too much of this wine, lest you become intoxicated. And then while staggering home, one of these street urchins will rob you. So, watch out there when you leave and you will float. Something else to say about it?
Brother.
Yes. And some of you just feel free to go get your food now. I think it's all out. Just wander back and get your food. I'm not going nowhere.
You know what
Come
you
here.
said, what you said, and I like the term that you use, beloved. That's very endearing, it's very spiritual. And I honestly want to say this is not patronizing. You said that when you're blessed, you become a blessing to someone else. And you've truly been a blessing to me today. Ade invited me, and we were at a meeting, and he was like, I want you to be here. And I was like, well, Dad, you know, I go to church or something, woo, woo. And he was relentless, you know, that I feel like you need to be here. So with that, and Ade is a blessing to me, too.
Yeah.
So I said, well, God, maybe this is a message that you're sending to me.
Right.
Because one of my biggest things was vanity. That I saw a movie once called The Devil's Advocate. And at the end of the movie, he said, by far, one of the devil's greatest weapons, vanity. I get him every time. To want to be able to do, I am the reason that all this happened. Okay, and today, all praise is due to Allah, to God, to Jehovah, that I realize that it's through no work of mine. I believe that everything moves in the spirit. Everything. I believe God works in me. I believe, too, that if I'm in a positive place, that I'm right where I'm supposed to be. There's something that I'm supposed to be getting out of this. That's why I find myself here. Praise to God, because I've got quite a bit. It helps me know that I'm on the right road to being where I should be. Because today is not, I give God all the credit. If you see me, anything that I do to help somebody, I give God all the credit. I work in mental health. I see a lot of people come in pain. Pain, great pain.
Which facility you work at?
I work at Bobby Wright Mental Health
Bobby
Center.
Wright, the incredible Bobby Wright, the honorable Bobby Wright.
The honorable Bobby Wright.
I feel like bowing down first when you say Bobby Wright.
Okay, in 17 years, and so I went through some pain, and I've come to see it, and I wondered, why did God keep me so that, because all my friends died, even my only sister in their addiction. And I was like, Lord, why do you keep me here? Because now I know when individuals come in my office with certain circumstances that I've experienced, I always let them know, you can't do this by yourself. Prozac can't do this. Thorazine can't do this. You know, somehow we've got to get to why you started doing what you're doing. What is it about you that makes you feel so inadequate? That you had to overcompensate with drugs? Because I did this. And I know what you're feeling, and they feel good when you say, they look at me, and not to boast, but the work of God, that I say, I did that. And they're like, wow.
You become a testament
I become
of the grace.
Right, the grace and mercy,
Grace
and
and
kindness and compassion.
In fact, when they talk about it, they call it amazing grace.
Amazing grace of God.
Of God. And
There ain't nothing I did. Don't give me no credit for this.
None of us.
I always say
That was my point.
Right.
This
Ain't
thing
nothing I did.
is about grace.
It's about grace.
This thing is about mercy.
It's about
and
mercy.
Every aspect of your being, your existence, is going on by grace.
The grace of
By
God.
mercy. And when you come into that realization, that alters you. That transcends
It
ego.
has altered my whole life.
Changes.
That person is dead.
That's right.
That person is dead. But I remember what that person was like enough to see it when it comes to me.
That's right.
You know, and realize that this person needs a healing, not medication, but a spiritual.
That's right. And then you become the vehicle of that grace. You stand back and get out of the way,
Get out of the way.
and let grace roll through you.
Right. That's right.
And that is the function of a therapist. That is the function of a clinician. That is the function of a counselor. You will simply become a vehicle by which God can transmit to that individual the experience of being loved.
Right.
And that is what heals.
Right.
So that's great.
And I do. I thank God for being here today, for keeping me and His grace to have me here.
Well, I
and
do too.
in the presence of all of you.
We thank God too.
All right now. All right. Give God a hand.
Give God a hand.
All right.
We ain't above the church.
All
We
right.
simply included.
All right now. All right.
It's included.
All right now.
So it's all right. Hallelujah is appropriate. It's appropriate.
Brother, my
Yes,
name
beloved.
is Samu Ali.
Samu Ali. Assalamu
Walaikum salam, Aki. And like the sister, I am so grateful to be here today. The things that you've spoken on, and you know, I've had studies and I've read and listened and questioned and challenged so many things in terms of my behavior and why I did what I did inside of that. I've just recently, well, a few months past, my mother passed, you know. And the blessing inside of that is that she was able to see a son that she had a knowing all the time would someday be reconnected, and her wish was that it would only be in her lifetime. And through the grace of God, you know, that manifested itself.
That's beautiful.
Yes, it is.
That's beautiful.
It's
Your
so
mother
wonderful.
was able to see her son.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, in Africa tradition, it is said that for a woman, there's only one thing other than giving birth capable of bringing so much happiness, so much joy. And our sisters can bear witness that no matter how painful that birth is, when that child pops out, that pain is replaced with an equal amount of joy. And it is said that the highest experience for the African mother is to see her son become a man. Said there's simply nothing like it. And you gave your mother that experience.
Yes, sir.
And therefore made right use of being a man. You see, that's beautiful, beloved.
Yes, it is.
That's
I want to
beautiful.
share that with you all. And inside of that concern, I also, you know, I too, this brother Isaiah is truly a wonderful, upright vessel, you know, a model of the things that, you know, that we need to have in our lives, you know. And today I'm so glad that I'm not ashamed to speak about things that I know that's from my heart. And it's good to be in the presence of people who can take compliments and know that they are just that, you know. And the brother speaks about processing, you know, like as if to say, you know, like it's not a done deal, you know. And in listening to what you were saying, Brother Bhagwan, and that about the intuition and what the benefits and the joy of just going on the knowing that this that is happening is another testification that you are connected, that you are loved, that the Creator and who have given you life is still there giving you life. Reality hasn't drifted from you, you've only drifted from reality, you know, and inside of that knowing. And so I say that to say that I always, in my mind, and I've always been this way, I question things, you know, and, you know, and I know that we will accept that 1 and 1 is 2 without question. That we are what we eat, maybe without a little question, you know. But why is it so hard to accept that we also digest what we think? You know?
That you become as you think it.
Okay, you know.
That's another level of wisdom. One of the things, beloved, is you'll find is that each of us are individually stamped with a certain capacity and ability to know. There are different levels of what we have called in the tradition, adhikaran means orientation. Some people are not strongly orientated in the search for truth. Some people search for truths. It's profound. Okay. Other people search for truth. It's more or less intense. We shared the story? Yes. I told you the story of the seeker? Right. Then you share that story, huh?
You know, Brother Bhagwan, I just thank Allah just for your presence, and I thank Allah for these brothers and sisters And I thank Allah for Brother Sadarji, and I also thank Allah for the fact that these people here today have a heartfelt need that go far beyond the 12 steps. Because even though the 12 steps is a beautiful beginning, and that's all that it really is. It's a very basic, low-level beginning. And like you said, the discovery to come back to your true self, you know, like it's much greater, much greater than that. And it's so interesting how so many of us come to just the beginning, and we're satisfied with just being there at the level. And so oftentimes I hear so many people talk about the mismanagement in their lives, because if there was a true understanding and application of just the second step, second principle, being faith and sanity, you would not have that mismanagement after years of practicing that which is considered to be spiritual. Because spirituality, when it is applied in earnest, okay, with faith, it automatically begins to self-correct the condition of the mind. It becomes self-correcting because those principles, you have to submit to them because they're much greater than you. Because those principles are those governing factors of your own existence. So I know that they perpetrate, but that's okay because I'm not the judge. My biggest concern is for self and those individuals who want to empower the children to overcome the environment, because it's about overcoming the environment, but first you must overcome the egoic condition of self.
And all of your egoic impulses. And remember that your egoic impulses, now to kind of return to the culture of psychology and psychiatry, is a paradigm for explaining it, articulating it. When you think about it, your egoic reflex is simply made up of your conditioning. Is that about right?
Right. Yes.
Yes. The way you have been patterned.
That's right.
By the way you've been parented, your environment, and all of those other attitudes, all of that. Where attitudes are simply conclusions that you have come to about life, self, and others when you were 6 years old, something.
Right. That's right.
Right? So, the egoic reflex and impulse is a sign of all of that. Now, what happens is when you become governed by a higher principle than your conditioning,
well,
then to the extent that you remain governed by that principle, it starves the force of the condition.
right.
A situation arises. You are conditioned, patterned to respond violently. That is your habit. That is your conditioning. That is what you are impulsed to do. You do it without thinking. It is automatic. But if you can become governed by a principle in that moment and act otherwise, what you do, you deprive that impulse of fuel. And then if you keep doing that over time, you starve the impulse. Ultimately, you see, beloved, a part of the ego transcendent process is about starving the ego out.
Killing.
You starve it to death. That's how you kill it.
Kill it. Kill it.
You fast to death.
For your question, let me tell the story.
Tell the story.
Background, because it's so important. And the man came to the great guru, teacher. He said, he asked him to teach him. He wanted to acquire this spirituality, this wisdom. And the guru told him to come with him. And he took him to a pond of water. And he told him to go forward. And as he went forward, the guru, with all his strength, with all his might, took him and put his head down in the water, to the point that he was appearing to, to drown him. And so the man was going through all kinds of changes and everything else, and he was almost to the point of being drowned, and he mustered up enough strength to pull himself back. And he said, "Oh, I heard about you, you mystics, you great teachers. Oh, so you want to kill me, you want to kill me." But the point being is, the search for wisdom and spirituality, you have to be willing to struggle just to the point that you will give up everything, die. You have to be willing to die in order to live. And see, even in the great teachings, even in the teachings of Christianity, they say you must be born again. Okay? Christ said you must die so God could live within you. And in Islam, they constantly say you must submit. You must submit everything. And so all of the faith tradition talks about this willingness. Christ even told a story about this spiritualism, and he likened it to a great pearl of wisdom, that you would give everything up in order to acquire it. And it is so self-evident that those of us who have been assembled here have been assembled through God's mighty grace and mercy, because we're willing to die in order to live. Because that's the only reason why we could be here.
You see, beloved, we were talking earlier about the person's innate predisposition to respond to grace, and how this predisposition and capacity to respond to grace is varied in individuals. One of the signs of a person's having a little higher ability to respond to the grace is such as what has happened here today. People who have a low capacity to respond to the grace that is God, they're not even interested in these kind of talks.
Right.
They're not interested in scriptures.
No.
They're not interested in anything related to
No,
that.
they're not.
They're primarily preoccupied with money, food, and sex, and being gratified at that level. Right? That is simply an individual who has a low capacity to respond to grace. Contrast to that individual, the Mahaviras, the Buddhas, the Muhammad, peace be upon them, the Jesus, you see, the Kabirs, the Dadus, the Patahoteps, all of these great men and women, you see, who have become our saints and therefore our spiritual hero. Like a Peter, one word, come, follow me. He drops the net. You can't drop a net.
Oh, that's right.
You must ask 10,000 questions. Jesus, where are you going? Hold up. Hold up.
What time we coming back?
Hold up. What time we coming back? You see what I'm saying? But we're going to eat over there. Right? Or at least let me finish. So you simply do not, as a Christian, have the capacity to respond to Jesus like a Peter. Like an apostle. So stop calling yourself apostle this and apostle that. You see? Very different phenomenon. You're not like a Ali, a Bilal. Before there was a Quran in writing, they were able to respond to the Prophet and submit on that basis. You see? Real Muslims. And not Muslims as a result of studying all of the Muslim books on theology. After reading and reflecting on all the surahs, there was Muslims before there was surahs. And there was Muslims before there was a physical Quran, and before there was a mosque, and before there was a prayer cross, and before there was 5 pillars, there were just one. And it's the same is the case in all of the great traditions. You see. Those kinds of individuals that were able to respond like Peter, Bilal, Ali's, they were gifted. They were the men. And there have been incidents in history of women too. And most of our sisters don't know about that. They have been made ignorant by men.
Yes.
Immensely ignorant by men. That's right. And some of the most powerful spiritual teachers that ever hit the planet was women. And I mean, they spit that Dharma straight. And it's something about when a woman is the Dharma. You see? It is said that God himself selected a woman to represent him as well. We call her Shakti. You see? The great female goddess. And it is through woman that he brings you up. It is said that God created woman so that you could feel his love for you, since you couldn't feel it otherwise. I mean, there's all kinds of things. The point I'm making is that there's different levels in a person's capacity to respond to grace. And when that capacity to respond to grace is very developed in an individual, then you become a Peter, you become a Sariputta, you become a Mahakasyapa. Just hear one turn of that Dharma that Buddha gave, isn't it? So you're right out there. You see, everybody cannot respond. These rare souls here simply responded. There was something, and they didn't know exactly what you're talking about. They had no idea what was going on. This could have been more madness, you know. And these are our weekends. This is precious time for us. We worked, and you need time to relax. But see, there was something in each of them that said it might be some truth. And that's what this brother, that's how he was able to break through his own dilemma. He said, damn, suppose there might be something.
That's right.
And I got to go because I can't run the risk of missing just even a little tiny piece of truth.
Yes, indeed.
That's a truth secret. You tell the story of the disciple coming to the great guru, and the guru did, put his head under that water, tried to drown. And the man jumped up amazed. And he's, kind of madness is this? And the guru said, wait, before you take a punch at me, I understand you want to kick my ass, but before you do that, let me ask you at least one question. I said, all right. But then I'm whooping your ass. But first answer the question. He said, beloved, what were you thinking about while I was holding you under that water?
Okay.
Were you thinking about your wife, your children? Of course not. The man said, I was thinking about how to breathe, how to get air. He said, you sure you weren't concerned about your bank account, your image? Man said, hell no. Man, you're driving around me, I'm trying to get air. Breathe. I was trying to breathe. That's all that was on my mind, breathing. And the guru said, when you want truth like that, come get up with me.
Okay, that's right.
See, some of you came here because you wanted some truth. Even if it was just a little bit. And it's a testament to Ada that he's given you enough that you have that confidence in. It's a great testament to you, brother.
That's a lot.
You see? And which means that you are responsible. Because when people trust you that much,
All right.
you understand?
All right.
That's a great responsibility.
Yes, it is.
And it must never be violated. You know, you must simply never burden them with anything that is less than true. Don't waste their time from these people who drive across the planet. Bilal and myself flew to India from this condition, poor, no money. But it was some truth there. Had to go get that. And my wife, who was just married, young, first daughter had been born, struggling like any young couple. And she reminded me, we don't have this kind of money. In fact, we didn't have none of the money. Bilal had a diners club, so I charged, put it on this ticket. You know what I mean? But still, they had to work and all of that. She said, I won't, you go, I won't be back. Don't come back. I won't be here. Now, that's choice now. You understand? That's got my head underwater. Because this is my wife. And I love her. And my children, you see? And my search for truth is not even about lack of love. You see my point? She was taking it very personal. That was the master holding my head. I had to ponder. And like Luther Vandross said, I was tossing and not turning. You know what I mean? I had so much on my mind. But I had to get next to you, and I caught the plane.
Okay.
I already paid that price. A wife I can get it me. Truth I can't get me. I got to go get the truth. That's what you black folks are made of. You simply don't understand who you are. You don't have a clue. You have no concept. That's all. You have vanity, but that's not a concept of your greatness. That's the false basis for pride, the false basis for a feeling of being great. I'm telling you, without vanity, you will see who you really are. That may Herodotus writing his book of histories. Herodotus was Greek. Hmm? They don't teach you the books of Herodotus in college. You see, they pass them. But in the second, Herodotus is the father of history, according to the Greeks. But in his book too, he writes about the Ethiopians burnt first black people, Africa, calls them gods walking on earth. You have to understand that you are remnants of a kind of man and woman that was considered by their contemporary world to be gods. Two-armed gods. And your condition today is simply the result of your failure to realize that and acting out of that failed recognition. When they say that you were made in God's image, no fooling, no kidding, and that's just too big for you. You can't handle that. That's too much for you to acknowledge that you made in God's image, that you made out of the same stuff that God is made out of. If I make a ring out of gold, is not this ring gold in its very nature?
Yes.
If you are made in the image and out of God, are you not God?
Yes.
It sounds almost blasphemous now. That's getting too deep. But that was that African wisdom. You see? In the West, they keep a certain gap between man and God. In Africa wisdom tradition, there ain't no gap.
I saw a movie, I have to say it again. But at the end of it, I mean, there's certain significance, and I've been watching a lot of religious kind of based movies. And for, not so much the special effects and blah, 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 but here in this new millennium, a lot of that's been coming out. And it was stigmata. And in the movie, it said, and the true book was supposed to have been written by Jesus, which the Catholic Church is trying to hide, and be killed for. It said, the kingdom of God is in you. If you split a piece of wood, God is there. If you lift up a rock, God is there. The rock is God. Right, exactly. So the kingdom of God is in me. And I have to remember that I represent God. And that I must do my best to be as pure and as honest and as in truth as I can be. It's not easy.
No, it's not.
Because myself tends to, my human flesh, that encases the spirit, tends to want to break loose.
Absolutely.
It wants to break loose. And it's hard for me to grab reins on a conscious level.
Yes, sir.
Because most of my behavior has been on an unconscious level. It's just from attitude, from disposition, from growing up, things I have been taught. And I got this kit and stuff, just automatically, I reach in there and get something. So now I got a new kit, you know what I'm saying? I'm still getting my tools together to keep my house in order.
Yes.
So every now and then I'm missing a piece.
I understand.
And so I have to ask God every day for that grace. Show me. I want this, but now that's what self wants.
Yes.
You might not have that in store for me. Now give me what you want out of that I want. And oftentimes I find, like you said, when I get in the way, when self jump out there, and I feel it in my spirit, don't do that.
Sure you can feel it. And then in that moment you can either be adolescent and rebellious, or you can be adult.
I can be adult.
And cooperative. And surrender. Submit. Get out of the way. And and down the road, somewhere way down the road, because there's different levels of these discussions. The group that you saw exited out of here, they said he should have came earlier, because there it is not simply at this level, because there's actual meditation, which is a whole nother process. You see, when I was talking about the transcendence of ego and the transcendence of the average condition, you're not going to get there without meditation.
Right. That's why I have to get up every morning and do that. Every morning, before I step out in the street.
And you will even learn what meditation is.
I mean, I don't know the depth of that, but I know I have to have this quiet time.
That's right.
With me and my God.
That's right. Now, meditation is the most radical use of that time, is structuring that time, bringing a great science to that time, because that is a sacred science, and there is no way to learn it. You cannot put together your own concoction. You know what I mean? You can't do that. So it's a very real process, and when you get to that level, beloved, now we get into the stuff. So this is all very foundational.
Yes.
But you got to have a foundation.
Yes.
But there's some very radical things I want you to consider. I mean, it's radical, too radical to even introduce now. But it all pertains to your true self. That's why I made the statement. You really don't know. You really don't have a clue. You really don't have a clue. But let me put it to you like this, and then we'll end on that note. If there's only God, and there's only one God, or only one being, if God is omnipresent, right? If he's omnipresent, then that means everywhere there's only God. On a rock, you will find me. Heave a piece of wood, and there I am. What is the gospel writer telling us? What is Thomas telling us in that